I'm going to start going over the 4 classifications of macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. See if I can get through it all at once. May not be able to. So carbohydrates. Carbo, what do you think? Carbon. Hydrate. Water, because you hydrate with water, right? So carbohydrates are simply carbon and water in some sort of ratio. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Carbohydrates. The monomer, the individual subunit of the carbohydrate, is the monosaccharide. So they could, that's a sugar cube, yeah. They taste sweet. So when you're trying to figure it out, don't stick random chemicals in your mouth to say, is this a carbohydrate? But they taste sweet, and they act as monomers to form much, much larger structures. So the takeaway here is the monosaccharide is the monomer of the carbohydrate. That was in lab. Oh, yeah. So this is where lab and lecture do really overlap. When we're looking at carbohydrate, the monomers of carbohydrates, those individual monomers are simple sugars. And there are 2 broad categories of simple sugars: pentose sugars and hexose sugars. So pentose, think pentagon. That's right, 5. It means 5. There are 5 sides to it. There are 5 carbons to it. Hexose sugars, on the other hand, hex has 6. Hexadecimal, a hexagon. So your pentose sugar is going to be like ribose and deoxyribose. We're going to talk about those later. Glucose, though, is a hexose sugar. And that's going to be one of the primary molecules that we look at this semester. Sugar is important because sugar is very, very small and it's water soluble. It's able to get into cells very, very easily. Once it's in the cell, you start breaking it down. And this is kind of cool. We'll get into this in a later lecture. But if I was to cut these bonds, what's released? Energy. And now I've gone from a 6-carbon molecule to a 3-carbon molecule, pyruvate. Then I'm going to take an enzyme and cut off another bond. So what do we release? More energy. And then I hack off a functional group, and then another functional group. Each time I cut something, I'm releasing the energy that was stored there. So we're going to take in these glucose molecules through food or whatever, and then we start cutting them apart, releasing that energy. If we don't need them to break apart, if we want to store them for later because we don't need the energy now, we can store them in lots of different ways. If we take 2 monosaccharides and put them together, you get a disaccharide. Now, this happens a lot in plants. Plants move sugar through their, I would say their veins, but through their vascular tissue using sucrose. So it's a disaccharide. So this sugar is going from one place to another in pairs. It's sort of like, you know, when people go to the bathroom, they're like, I can't go by myself. I need to take somebody with me. I don't do that, but some people need that. It's like for comfort. I don't know. So they travel together pretty easily. Sometimes, you guys have probably eaten plants, and you've tasted sugar. I mean, you eat an apple. It's very sugary. Did you know I found a sugar cane? I was at, I think I was at Wegmans, and I was like, pure sugar cane. And I haven't had pure sugar cane before, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but by God, I was going to suck on that thing. So I picked up the pure sugar cane. You cut off the edge of the bark, and you're just like, yes, there is sugar in there, because sugar cane transports its sugar in the form of sucrose. It is the sweetest thing ever. For making rum, yeah. If you don't need the energy right away, your body is one that says, you know, there may be a time when I need more energy. I'm just going to store this. Your body's great at doing that. It's like built up to think, you know, you could be in the middle of the summer. There's food all over the place, and your body's like, well, winter's coming sometime. There might not be food. I'm just going to store this for later. You can start storing that energy in the form of polysaccharides. Now, that's a whole bunch of monosaccharides stuck together. So it's not just disaccharide, it just keeps going out. Condensation reaction after condensation reaction. And these start to form different patterns. They might be these unbranched patterns. These keep linking back and forth with each other. So you can see going across the top and down here. It's just, there's no branching. Everything is laying right on top of each other. These are very, very stable. It's almost like if you took a stack of books, laid them flat on the ground, you could stand on it. It is totally stable and fine. Cellulose, glycosaminoglycans, and chitin are all unbranched structures. You've stepped on a cockroach before, right? Yeah, what sound does it make? Crunch, because the chitin in its shell is made of these unbranched carbohydrates. It took a lot of weight to break them. Ooh, you know what's the worst, though, with cockroaches? When you step on them and you lift up your foot and they're still alive. And they crawl off. Yeah, you know, because you're like, oh. And you're like, how did you do that? Mystical, magical cockroach. Yet, they live through a lot. You could be moderately branched. If it's moderately branched, starch is a moderately branched carbohydrate. That means that it's got some spaces in there that branch off. Can't really use it for structure. That'd be like taking a bunch of books and sticking them on top of a toilet paper roll. You step on it and it's not stable. This open area, though, allows for water to get in here. And what happens if water gets in there? That hole. What? You're totally right. It doesn't store energy. Water goes in there. What does it do? It breaks down. Using what process? Yes, hydrolysis. So water gets in there, breaks it down, breaks that bond, and what's released? Energy. And you've broken off these pieces that you can then use for breaking down even more. Plants use starch a lot to store energy. They either store it as glucose, like onions do, or they store it as starch, like potatoes do. Again, I do want to point out potatoes do not come from trees. They grow underground. I have to point that out because one, students have this misconception you can just go and pick potatoes. But the other thing is, the potato life cycle is conducive to for starch, to storing starch, because potatoes grow first as they're a plant. So you've got leaves coming out from above the ground. What process are those leaves undergoing every single day? Photosynthesis. What is the product of photosynthesis aside from oxygen? Glucose. So they are producing a lot of sugar. That sugar is helping the plant grow during the summer. But then winter starts to come toward. It needs to then store that sugar. But it doesn't store sugar as glucose because glucose will break down very quickly. So it starts to take all of the glucose that it's making and build these starch molecules. We don't store it above ground, it stores it below ground in these tubers. So what will happen is the bottom underneath the ground starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger as it fills with starch. And then that starch keeps it so the plant will live through the winter because the top dies off. No more photosynthesis all winter long. Right, they call them tuber because it's a tube and a root. So underground, you've got this sugar. Spring comes along. The plant has survived all winter on this stored up sugar in the form of starch. And then it starts to produce all of these roots and shoots coming out of it. Now, how many of you guys have had potatoes in your closet, like in your pantry, for long enough that they've started to grow? Yeah, right? That's because they are uniquely, they literally stored all of that energy from when they were in the field all the way to your pantry before they said, okay, it's time to grow now. And the third structure is a highly branched structure. These are really for short-term energy storage. We store our energy this way as glycogen. So in animal cells, glycogen is really, really highly branched. What that means is you can get lots and lots of water in there. And if water gets in there, what's going to happen? It's going to break down. Through what process? Hydrolysis. Cutting bonds. And each time those bonds are cut, what's released? Energy. So far, so good? Now here's the deal, though. We make way more glycogen than we need. Because every time you're eating something, you're taking these individual monomers into your body, and you're building glycogen. You're taking those starches, and you're breaking them down. You're building glycogen. And your cells are like, hey, I've already got enough energy. Let's store this for later. So then your body starts transitioning that glycogen into a type of fat or lipid. You see when I did that? That was very nice. It's like I've taught this before. So we're going from this carbohydrate glycogen, and we start to convert it into fats or phospholipids or steroids or waxes. We use fats usually for very long-term energy storage. It does. It takes a lot to break down the fat. These are also known as triglycerides. Why? Because there are 3 fatty acid components attached to a glycerol molecule. You're taking your glycogen and you're breaking it down to form these triglycerides. They're exactly like that. It's like 3 tines coming off the bottom of a glycerol. And that actually lets them start to interlink together, which we'll get to in a second. Now, there are 2 big kinds of fats, and you've probably heard of them. Saturated fats and unsaturated fats. And you will need to know the difference, so you know, between saturated and unsaturated fats. Saturated fats, I swear to you, I'm going to tell you exactly how I remember them. Saturated fats all have single bonds, so saturated with an S, single bonds, forming a straight line, also with an S. And they are solid with an S at room temperature. Butter is a solid at room temperature. Its fatty acids are going to be entirely linear, straight. Bacon has a lot of saturated fat. And we've talked about bacon before, haven't we? Well, I think we talked about bacon, where you go to the store and you feel gypped after cooking bacon. Yeah, because when you put the bacon in the pan, it starts to sizzle, 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 and you get all of that saturated fat going from a solid. You've increased it beyond room temperature, so it becomes a liquid. So it drains into the bottom of the pan. You pull out the bacon, and what happens? After a while, it solidifies. Yeah, the bacon is small. You're right. Keep your eye on the prize. The prize is the bacon. In this case, we were talking about the fats, but you know, bacon. Bacon's smaller. That's the big thing. But what's happening is you've got these. So I'd like to do a lot of puppet shows. We got a triglyceride. See, those are 3 fatty acids in a glycerol molecule, and a triglyceride over here, 3 fatty acids in a glycerol. Saturated fats, they're linear, which means they can interlink. So they're very, very stable and very strong. That's compared to unsaturated fats. Unsaturated fats have a double bond in them, which means they have a bend. So here's how I remember unsaturated fats. Unsaturated fats have a bend in them like a U does. Doesn't have to help. Helps me. That's all that matters. So there's some double bonding in there. And because they're double bonded, so we got this, and then I got these weird crooks going on because there are bends in it. So now they don't match up as well. The glycerol molecules can't interlock. So instead, they just sort of flow past each other, making them a liquid at room temperature. Think about your Mediterranean table. Olive oil, nuts. When you open up a walnut, it's wet inside. That's not because it's water. Because water, wet. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I was just like, it's not because there's water in the nut. It's because the nut has oil in it. So olive oil, the nuts, the oil in nuts, these are unsaturated fats. So you got saturated fats that are linear, straight lines and solids at room temperature. Unsaturated fats have a double bond, so they have a bend, and they are liquids at room temperature. What is this again? So it's probably an unsaturated fat. What's it made out of? It's made out of butter? It's fake butter. But the question is the oil then saturated versus unsaturated? And truthfully, I don't know about the chemical composition. If it's a liquid at room temperature, it's very likely it's unsaturated. Another type of lipid is the phospholipid. We will talk about phospholipids ad nauseum. I have an entire 2.5-hour lecture about the nature of phospholipids. I know, don't shake your head. It's going to be cool. We'll learn how life happened because of the phospholipids. If we didn't have phospholipids, life wouldn't have happened. Phospholipids have 2 fatty acid tails with lots and lots of carbon and hydrogen. All right, if there's lots of carbon and hydrogen, what does it tell you about that part? Polar or nonpolar? Nonpolar. So how does it interact with water? Hydrophobic. The top side has a positive part and a negative part, which means it's polar. How does it interact with water? It's hydrophilic. And if you have a hydrophilic section and a hydrophobic section, this molecule is termed what? Amphipathic, as it says on the slide. So if you were to throw this into water, you would form either a bilayer or a micelle. Phospholipids ultimately make up the cell membranes. We got steroids. Steroids are these ring-shaped structures. Steroids are they're lipids that are used for transporting information from one part of the body to another. Pretty much one part of your body secretes a steroid, it gets into your blood, and it goes somewhere else. Plants also use these hormones. Plants, they don't use the same ones we do, but they do produce hormones that needs to travel through the plant to cause reactions to happen elsewhere. They're not terribly soluble in water. You've got cholesterol, estrogen, testosterone. But the thing I want you to notice about steroids is they have these distinctive ring structures because they are carbon-bound molecules. And then finally, we have waxes. Waxes are nonpolar lipids that are secreted to prevent water loss. Plants secrete wax. If you've ever looked at a leaf of a plant, it's got this sort of weird shine to it. That is to keep water on the inside. Bees make wax. Why do bees make wax? Well, they do it to keep their babies wet. Because if they don't, their babies dry out and die. Keeps everything dry on the, that keeps them moist on the inside, but also it's for storage. Yeah, it stops them from getting soaked in the rain.